All right, I think we're getting the go-ahead to begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ground Rounds for the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, Dr. John Piacentini. I think he's known to many of us as the chief of the Division of the Chief of Child Psychology at the Semel Institute and director of the CARES Center and the Child OCD, Anxiety, and Tic Disorders Program, which he founded nearly 30 years ago and has grown into one of the leading specialty programs in the country. Beyond his work here at UCLA, Dr. Piacentini is an international expert in OCD, anxiety, and tic disorders. He's authored over 300 papers and 9 books. He has led landmark treatment trials for OCD, anxiety, and tic disorders, and really been a central contributor to our understanding of these disorders and their trajectories and treatment. He's held a number of leadership roles, including serving as the former president of APA's Society for Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology and the American Board of Professional Psychology. And currently, he is the chair for the scientific advisory boards of both the TLC Foundation for Body-Focused Repetitive Behaviors and the Tourette Association of America. We're so fortunate to have him speaking today on understanding anxiety post-COVID. I know I am personally grateful for decades of mentorship and his role in the division and the department as really a wonderful friend, colleague, and collaborator. So with that, I will turn it over to John to begin.
Thank you, Tara, and welcome everybody. Let me move my slide here. There we go. Here are my disclosures. You can take a look at them. Nothing that would impact what I'm about to say for this talk. And let's get started. So, COVID was started 5 years ago. It seems like it's been forever, but really not that long. And there are, if you read the newspaper, and talk with anybody about any of this, we know that the sequelae of COVID are still around. So even though we're past COVID, I think it's still important, and many people are doing research and findings are coming out documenting some of the impacts of COVID that are still affecting children and adolescents and even adults, especially with regard to anxiety. But let's take a step back. And this is a slide that I've always found very impactful. This is from the American Psychological Association Annual Stress in America Survey. These are the results from 2018. And in this, for the first time in the history of this survey, as you can see, Gen Zs, our youth, were reporting poorer mental health than the generations that preceded them. Only 45% of Gen Zers reported that they were in very good or excellent mental health, compared to, again, much higher rates even from millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, and older adults. And why might that be? Well, if you look at the purple on the left, there are a number of factors that Gen Zs reported as being more impactful to them, impacting them in negative ways or stressing them compared to adults overall. Mass shootings, rise in suicide rates, climate change and global warming, separation and deportation of immigrants and migrant families. Again, this was happening around this time, and widespread sexual harassment and assault reports. So these are all things that are really impacting Gen Z. At the time, we would hear things like, well, climate change isn't going to affect you older people, it's going to affect us. We're the ones that are going to need to live in this new world, et cetera. So pre-COVID, stress and anxiety rates were rising in Gen Zs at a potentially a higher rate than with millennials. Around COVID, during COVID, slightly after COVID, a number of other surveys were done and identifying a number of other stressors, again, for this generation. Technology, as we all know, a huge source of stress, as well as joy and connection. We're going to talk more about that. Political issues, including possible civil war in the US, again, thinking about the time. Crime and violence, the future, affordability, getting into college, grades and school achievement, and being accepted by others. So it really has been pretty tumultuous over the last few years, especially for younger people who may not have the capacity or the background or the context to really understand these different stressors that are happening. From a global perspective, according to the United Nations State of the World in 2021, over 13% of youth aged 10 to 19 live with the World Health Organization defined mental disorder. That's 80 million 10 to 14-year-olds, 86 15 to 19-year-olds, 89 million boys, and 77 million girls. So these are really huge numbers. Highest prevalence. At this time, we're Middle East and North Africa. We know those rates have probably gone up given all of the unrest and war and violence going on in some of these areas, North America and Western Europe. And 40% of these youth have anxiety or depression. And that's what's relevant to this talk today. If you look at this by the United Nations Children's Fund, again, as part of this survey, anxiety and depressive disorders account for well over half of the specific disorders in 10 to 19-year-old girls. In boys, it's still the highest, representing about a third. So we know that anxiety and depression holds a special place in mental health, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that developmentally in just a second. Suicide as well. During the pandemic, this was a CDC survey, a little over a third of students experienced poor mental health. 44%, almost half, experience persistent sadness or hopelessness, higher for youth that have faced specific challenges. Hispanic students and lesbian, gay, bisexual students had significantly higher rates. And poor mental health and persistent sadness or hopelessness was highest among LGBTQ students. And LGBTQ plus teens and young adults were more likely than youth not in that category to report using alcohol, drugs, or pills. So again, we have more vulnerable populations of youth and young adults that are suffering even more, or were at this time. About 20% of students had seriously considered suicide. 9% had made an attempt. About 31% increase in emergency room visits for mental health reasons. And again, the prevalence for suicide and in ER visits was highest among youth that are facing specific challenges. So we see these huge rates of anxiety. We see the sequelae of anxiety and suicidality and comorbid depression. We know the impact of anxiety is far and wide reaching, impacting educational development, developmental milestones, increasing risk for a number of associated disorders or risk behaviors, including physical illness. And these impacts lead all the way into adulthood. And I think we heard a little bit of that 2 weeks ago from Tara's talk as well. This is another slide that demonstrates this. You can see here, this is from the Healthy Minds survey up to 2019, over 120,000 youth. And if you look at these rates, the risk factors for suicidal ideation and suicide attempt, certainly depression is a primary driver. But if you look at the anxiety and depression group, they had significantly higher rates of ideation and attempts as well. So anxiety in combination with depression is especially dangerous. So we have this relatively sad state of affairs with regarding to the psychiatric issues and psychosocial issues of our youth. The issue from COVID that has had perhaps the most significant impact has been on school avoidance. And certainly we know that school avoidance, school non-attendance is certainly contributes to the psychiatric status, the mental health of our youth. But the numbers here, again, I think you probably are familiar with these, but we're pretty high as well, with a doubling of school avoidance rates, more likely for youth with a history of anxiety, depression, or previous school avoidance. So here again, anxiety and depression are impacting school. And we know again here that the rates increased for youth challenged by social determinants in addition to mental health issues. This slide here shows that the majority of school districts in red or orange or even kind of light orange, these are all districts with 20% or more chronic absenteeism in 2021-22. And it encompassed a significant proportion of the population. Um, but it's not clear that these rates, they have gone down, but they haven't gone down for everybody. And in a survey that was presented at the White House Summit on Chronic Absenteeism last year, they examined attendance rates across 2019-20 to 2021 and 2022-23, and they found that 230,000 youth remain unaccounted for that had been attending school pre-COVID and were not attending school. They couldn't find these kids. They were not responding to any of the surveys, suggesting that there are 230,000 kids that are probably just no longer attending school. In California, 150,000 students were no longer on any school rolls, and this would be public schools, private schools, et cetera. So chronic absenteeism was really high and growing over this course, even into 22, 23, which would arguably be post-COVID. In this White House Summit on Chronic Absenteeism, they had the leaders in all areas related to this meet for a couple of days and come up with a plan to address this. Reading the report, it's really disappointing that there was very limited attention to the role of mental health. And we all know, working with youth, especially youth with different kinds of psychiatric or psychological challenges, that anxiety, depression, other related mental health factors are huge contributors to school non-attendance. And the fact that this wasn't really addressed in this report was quite disappointing. So developmental impact of school attendance is multifaceted. And I probably don't need to tell you this. Loss of control, we know, in the pandemic led to a lot of issues. Kids were always under observation, loss of freedoms, decreased social activity, again, goes without saying. Kids didn't have the ability to refine their social skills, their problem solving, missed educational job opportunities. They weren't able to learn. And for anxious youth, it was a reinforcement of escape and avoidance. Youth with social anxiety, school refusal, separation anxiety don't like going to school. Made more difficult for them because they're afraid of being away from home or away from parents or having other negative things happen. This reinforced these fears. So that's just kind of the high view, 20,000 foot view. Let's look at some of the other factors that are impacting this rise in social anxiety. And you may be familiar with a lot of these. It's been in the news. It's been on talk shows. You can't turn one way or the other without hearing somebody talking about social media or intensive parenting or not attending school. Let's take a little closer look at some of these factors and see how they might come together to fuel this increasing rates of anxiety. So intensive parenting is overprotection and overprogramming of an emotional overinvestment in one's children. We've heard this called helicopter parenting, aggressive parenting, and it really is parents that are overinvested in their kids to the point that they are overprogrammed. They're protecting them in ways that go beyond what would probably an objective observer would say would be necessary. And what this research has shown among a number of studies, that intensive parents have higher rates of guilt, anger, and burnout. It's really hard to be so controlling and so worried and so emotionally invested in your child. Among the kids, it's linked to reduced agency. These kids have no sense of self because their every behavior, every activity is guided by the parent. They have limited opportunities to develop resilience and coping. And the maxim here that I've heard many times in regard to this is you can't teach somebody to walk if you don't let their feet touch the ground. And I think that's a good example of what this looks like. Kids are able to internalize this sense of non-responsibility and poor self-efficacy. So some of the things that we see with intensive parenting is if the child gets a bad grade in school, it's the school's fault. It's not the child's fault. If the child has social difficulties, it has nothing to do with the child. It has everything to do with the other kids and the other parents. And these kids are being absolved of any responsibility, any agency, any need to better themselves, in a sense, to address some of these deficits. These kids also are active 24/7. They don't have opportunities to spend time on their own, to think, to get bored, to engage in imaginative play, which we're going to talk about in a second, is certainly another important contributor. Fears about child safety. So traditional and social media are all about sensationalism and clicks, and you don't get clicks from showing cute puppies. You know, and when social media or first started, YouTube, I mean, the hot videos were dogs on skateboards. We don't see that so much anymore. Now it really is a lot of negativity. You know, there are kidnappers on every corner. Children are always under parental observation. Parents have been arrested for letting children play unsupervised. This is iterative with smartphones. So kids that aren't allowed to leave the house are going to have to look to internal methods for connection. And smartphones is one way to do that. And there's a lot of virtual play. There's less actual play. Kids learn to see the world as dangerous, reinforced again by not only intensive parenting, but well-meaning parents as well. Reduced physical activity also, which may be related to rises in obesity. And this, similarly to intensive parenting, limits development of self-regulation and self-confidence. Now, let me caveat this. I'm not saying that every parent is intensive and every child is homebound and there's no dangers in the world for kids. Certainly there are, but we're talking about some of the extremes here that in combination can lead to increased rates of anxiety in youth and ultimately depression. Smartphones and social media. This is getting a lot of the talk here. Jonathan Haidt and others have written about this. There have been debates. There's a lot of disagreement about the impact of smartphones and social media. But some of the points here is that we know that social media exposes youth to unrealistic expectations. Everybody is popular, everybody is beautiful, everybody is smart, everybody does really cool things, except the poor kids that are watching, viewing these things. Bullying, again, is now viral instead of individual, and that's been going on for a while. You know, in the past, there have been a number of really sad and tragic outcomes from viral bullying and social media. We know that that smartphones interfere with learning and sleep. We know that there's a lot of mental health themed influencers, which can actually increase the rates of psychiatric and psychological issues. About 3 or 4 years ago, there was a huge rise in something called functional neurologic disorders or functional tics. It's very dramatic increases in young adults and adolescents going to the emergency room with uncontrollable, violent, injurious tics. That much of this was traced back to influencers demonstrating these behaviors. Too much information about mental health issues. So one of the issues that actually has come up as a contributor to the increase in anxiety, depression, and psychiatric issues actually is too much information. We can't turn one way or the other, kids or adults, about learning about different kinds of psychiatric problems or anxiety this or depression that, or this leads to autism. And obviously, I mean, much of the work that we do is to educate the public about mental health issues in terms of prevention and recognition, and that is really important work. But in some cases, people are starting to think that, and the research shows that maybe this is going too far. Not everything can be about mental health. And then the developmental impact, again, is with social media, kids are engaging in virtual play versus actual play. And this is a big issue. And this has led to the issue of taking phones out of schools. It's a raging debate right now of whether kids should be allowed to use smartphones in schools or not. And one of the issues here is that kids in many schools, in many places, many kids are sitting in activities at lunch or on recess. They're on their phones and they may be interacting with each other, but it's impacting actual in real life connection. And that can be very difficult because kids need to play. Play is actually the work of children. And through play, through actual play, kids learn how to manage disagreements. They learn how to manage different roles, playing games, um, and other activities. And without this opportunity, only on virtual play, kids really don't learn how to problem solve. They don't learn how to cooperate in realistic ways. They don't learn how to manage emotions that may arise in conflict or in conversation with others. So this, again, interacts with intensive parenting in really significant ways. Poor mental health literacy is another contributing factor. And Ross Sabo at the Geffen Academy is a real leader in this area and has done a lot of really tremendous work. And some of the content on this slide is drawn from some of his lectures and conversations. We know that emotional expression is a necessary and healthy part of life. But as we said before, there's mental health information overload is rampant. And what it's leading to in many cases, a conflation of normal and clinical emotions. And if you think about conversations that you've heard, even among adults, if you think about what's going on in the news, what's going on in the media, um, any little emotional blip now is labeled as, if not considered as, a clinically relevant or clinically important issue. So individuals are no longer sad, they're depressed. I'm depressed. Anxiety and fear, somebody doesn't say I'm afraid of this, they say I'm phobic of this. I'm socially anxious, I'm separation anxious. If I'm too excited, I'm manic. If I'm stressed, it must mean I've been traumatized. If I say, oh, I ate too much, now I feel fat, that's considered an eating disorder. And these terms are used interchangeably now, and they're actually blurring the distinction between typical, normative, the range of emotional responses or feelings, to potentially subclinical symptoms, to actual clinical disorders and syndromes. And by blurring this, we're losing the ability or understanding to actually determine when something is truly in need of intervention or whether something is just a word being misused to describe a normal situation. So this is all leading to people, especially youth, feeling that they're having higher rates of disorders, actual problems, and it's leading adults to sometimes interpret this in the same manner. Again, that's not to say that the rates of these disorders are indeed increasing. They are, but there's a general sense among the community that everything is being couched in terms of mental health issues and mental health descriptors. An example of this conflation is stress versus anxiety and fear. So fear is a response to threats here and now. If I see a mouse, I'm fearful. Anxiety is a future-focused fear. I worry that I'm going to see a mouse. Stress can be related to anxiety. It's certainly the physiologic and emotional reactions can look just like anxiety in certain times, but stress is a response or a reaction that not only frighten or irritate, but also excite. I'm stressed about my birthday party tomorrow. I'm stressed about going on vacation. Stress occurs in reaction to both positive, negative, and real or imagined events and situations. Stress is a normal part of our childhood, but in many cases it's being over-pathologized, which can also blur the distinctions between a cluster of symptoms or behaviors that might require some kind of professional treatment versus normal childhood. This also goes along with the intensive parenting about parents feeling so guilty or so over-invested in their children that anytime they see any stress, even what we might consider a positive or a normative stress, there can be a reaction to that is negative. And not surprising, when you add a lot of this stuff up, rates of parental burnout are really on the rise. And a lot of this is related to parenting pressure based on a lot of the factors we've talked about before. Parenting pressure leads to chronic stress and exhaustion, and it can overwhelm the parent's ability to cope and function. And in some cases, it can lead to greater detachment from their child. So from this almost over-enmeshment, over-involvement, to feelings of anger or guilt related to the child and detachment. So surveys have shown that 2/3 of parents during COVID were describing parental burnout. Not surprising. Kids were at home. Kids were doing remote school. The numbers have gone down a little bit, but still over half of parents by summer 2023 reporting parental burnout. And this is a strain, and parents report straining to live up to unrealistic expectations, just like kids watching social media, feeling judged by the family and friends if the kid's not on the honor roll or sports stars. A culture of unrealistic achievement, again, driven in part by social media. And many parents still haven't bounced back from the pandemic. They're trying to catch up for lost time and opportunities. My child lost, 2 years of ballet or schoolwork or socialization and working overtime, trying to get kids caught up, and kids are feeling over-programmed in some ways, which can also lead to stress on part of the parent who has to do the driving or whatever else, and the child who's missing the opportunity for free play and having fun with their friends. In terms of predictors and protectors of parental burnout, studies have shown that kids with higher numbers of extracurriculars um, are more likely, it leads to parental troubles with concentrating and other risk behaviors. Also, the kids have more difficulty getting in fights with low self-esteem, etc. Protective factors, children that have more time in unstructured play and quality time with their parents lead to less burnout or less negative feelings. And with regard to the parental burnout, parents who feel good about themselves feel less prone to burnout as well. So putting all this together, and again, and this slide specifically says in the worst case, these are some of the factors that when significant and when present, certainly increase the risk for anxiety and subsequently depression, but they're not impacting all children and all adolescents. But a significant proportion of families, youth and families and parents are being impacted by varying degrees of these factors and suffering various degrees of psychological or mental health distress, or even symptoms or even disorder as a result of these. So in the worst case, when you put this together, parents and children share a worldview characterized by threats. Everything, social media, traditional media, the newspaper, is all about the bad news. And again, in all honesty, there's a lot of things going on in the world that are frightening, that are difficult, that are really upsetting. There are a lot of good things as well. In some ways, many ways, this is one of the best times to be alive for kids in terms of health, in terms of poverty worldwide, in terms of education, in terms of the abilities to learn, the knowledge that youth have. There are many positive things. Granted, in areas around the world, there are some really horrific things going on that are tempering this. But broadly speaking, it's probably a better time in the world for many people than in the past. But this worldview is not shared because a lot of the negativity, again, through kids, through social media, for example, unrealistic expectations, feeling inadequate, this over-pathologization of normative reactions and behaviors, led by mental health illiteracy or conflation of normal reactions with psychiatric issues. And then this feeling overburdened with structured activities. There's no downtime for parent or child. And I think to me, this is one of the most important aspects of this lack of quality time together between parent and child, and lack of unstructured time apart. And kids need time just to sit and to think. One of the most important tools for helping children develop self-regulation and emotional and cognitive capacity is being bored. Boredom is a time where their minds can go free. They may feel like they can't think of anything to do, but they find things to do. You can learn to cope, learning resilience. A lot of our best thoughts come when we're bored, when we don't have anything to do. When kids are structured all the time, it really gives them no time to think or imagine in some ways that can, again, expand their horizons and teach them, help them develop some cognitive skills and emotional coping that they can use. And this limited opportunities, again, really can lead to, is a very strong risk factor for depression and anxiety or other kinds of coping issues moving forward. Again, not all kids fall into this camp. A lot of the kids that we see in our program many of them do fall into some of these baskets here, some of these factors. And again, as I just said, the long-term effects of anxiety symptoms, fearing new experiences, avoidant, over-reliance on parents, in combination with overprotective parenting, really doesn't allow these kids to develop the skills they need to overcome their own anxieties, to work through different kinds of issues, behavioral issues, cognitive issues, emotional issues, and that leads to stalled development and certainly an increased risk for anxiety and over time then depression. So what's difficult for parents in terms of providing kids with autonomy, letting kids struggle, breaking free from some of in some of this intensive parenting? Some of the things that we hear: if you just need to let your child work through it, you need to let your child or teen struggle so they can develop their own skills. Parents will say, I'm damaging my child. He's going to hate me. It's just easier to do it. Let me do it for you. And this overprotection trap, the parents doing everything for the kids and the kids don't have a chance. Again, the kids' feet aren't allowed to touch the ground, keeps anxiety fixed in place, and it limits progression towards the next developmental stage. And over a period of time, this can lead to what some people call the failure to launch. The kids that are, leaving high school, early college, even young adults that have not had the opportunity or been able to individuate, to develop responsibility for their own behaviors, to learn how to manage their own coping and emotional issues. So facilitating school absence. So we talked about the school avoidant behavior before. Compared to this is a survey by the Ad Council done in association with the White House Summit on Absenteeism, and they found 93% of all parents agree that in-person learning is important. But only 51% of parents with chronically absent youth agree with this. So many of the kids that aren't in school may have parents that say going to school in person isn't that important. And this is I think this is a troubling statistic, because I think it's pretty clear from experience and the literature that in-person schooling is important for, again, developing socialization, for teaching kids how to manage themselves, their emotions, their cognitions, their behaviors in settings that may not always be so fun. But the socialization piece is really important. And it may be that many of these parents that with chronically absent youth might be related to anxiety disorder, social anxiety, separation anxiety, and it's easier to keep the kids at home or learning online. And it may not be completely unrealistic to say that some of these parents of kids with anxious youth may have anxiety themselves that are working on this. So when we're talking about school avoidance, when we're talking about some of these issues, it is critically important to screen for anxiety and to think about ways of managing and getting kids back into school and really addressing this issue. Anxiety may be one of the most important initial starting points or targets to consider when we're doing this work. So this is from a U.S. Centers for Disease Control report. I'm going to talk about some of the big health issues and then describe some of the things that we're doing here that can be done locally. But some of the big issues, improving access to youth anxiety prevention and treatment to really address many of these issues, we need to connect families to mental health. We need to understand gaps in the mental health workforce, investigate funding policies, social determinants of health, and universal screening, which we do now have for youth for anxiety. Or recommended anyway. So, and there's some really interesting work going on here. The Ballmer Institute at the University of Oregon has a huge endowment, and they've actually working with the University of Oregon to develop an undergraduate major in behavioral health. So college kids are actually taking courses and that will allow them to go into schools under supervision and do some of this preliminary or very basic early work to create resilience in youth, and to help them manage in some ways symptoms that might be impacting their ability to again go to school or to prevent future development of anxiety, depression, other psychiatric or psychological issues. They're not therapists, but they are just an early intervention first step, which which is something that can be scalable. If it can be scalable, would be a real game changer. Community-based education to raise awareness and recognition of mental health conditions or reduce stigma. A lot of that work is going on. A lot of that work is being done here. Again, we talked about universal screening, school-based programs, remote delivery and other technologic advances. In Europe now, especially at the Karolinska, they have a number of online programs, kind of light touch psychological or psychiatric interventions for OCD, anxiety, depression, Tourette's, and other factors. Again, these have smaller effect sizes in terms of the degree of symptom reduction, but the impact is huge because they can reach hundreds and to thousands of youth in a very efficient way. And again, the training paraprofessionals and non-professionals, I just referenced that. I like this slide. This is based on a World Bank study. School-based mental health return on based mental health interventions. This study showed that money invested in mental health interventions in schools returns $21 for every $1 invested over 80 years. Now, 80 years is a long time scan, but this is really going to be important if we're going to be changing society the way that we look at this. And the greatest return on investment was for lower middle income countries, which showed a return of for every $1 US invested in mental health based interventions for schools, a return of almost $90 in these low income countries. So that is a investment well worth making. You saw this slide last week, so let's turn to what we can do here as mental health professionals. You know that we have effective treatments. This was the CAM study that Dr. Tara presented 2 weeks ago. We have treatments that work well. CBT, medication, SSRIs, and combination treatment all work well to reduce child anxiety. And the effects over time at 9-year follow-up that participants who receive CBT compared to pill placebo demonstrated improved trajectories pertaining to life satisfaction, overall impairment, and impairment in academic functioning. Youth who received CBT or CBT plus medication had increasing employment rates. Medication didn't have these significant future effects as compared to the placebo group. But all kids that responded to treatment, including those receiving medication only, did have better outcomes to some extent. So our treatments can lead to long-term outcomes, and it's really important to think about that. So I'm going to talk right now, just have a couple minutes left. I want to talk about some of the programs that we have developed and are disseminating through the UCLA CARES Center for Child Anxiety, Resilience, Education, and Support. Much of this work has been done with Kate Sheehan, who is our managing director, and Patricia Lester is the co-director of the center. We have a number of other people that are working with us in that regard as well. The CARES Center takes a whole environment report. You've heard of whole child, addressing all the factors associated with the child, mental health, education, all of these different factors. We look at the whole environment. We want to focus on child anxiety and resilience across all of the environments that the child might be impacted by, including family, healthcare, and school. So we have programs that we've developed that are child-centric, family-centric, and school-centric. And I'm going to briefly go through a couple of these right now. So 2 of our tools, and these are very simple tools that are easily disseminable through our website. You probably are familiar with all of these. You may be. The feeling thermometer is ubiquitous. The butterfly breath is a breathing technique. And I'm going to show you a 2-minute clip that demonstrates how we use these and how we have disseminated these into the community. And it's through a program called Fuertos Juntos, or Strong Together, which is a 6-session bilingual school-based family resilience program that's taught in a number of languages across LA County. We just started a group for Santa Monica schools last Friday. And it's kind of a light touch, teaching some basic resilience skills to families. And let me show you this video here if it works.
I would say one of the primary ones is the use of the feeling thermometer.
It's really good as a parent to know where you are on the feeling thermometer, and also for your kids to know where they are on the feeling thermometer.
Pienso yo en los regaños veces, porque a veces sí como que me altero, veces muy rápido.
Pero a veces cuando tú te enojas, tú quieres que todo el mundo se desaparezca.
Your numbers here, 25, 50, 75, and 100. In the green, you're feeling very calm. And then when you're in the red, we are the most uncomfortable. We may say things that we don't mean, we may yell and scream. Some people may even withdraw and not talk at all.
It's also used as a communication tool so that families can understand what the experience, what the feeling, what the emotion of another individual in their family might be.
When I come back from school, she says like, "Are you feeling good?" And I'm like, "Yes."
Si tú entras a mi casa, tú verías el termómetro aquí, así.
Sí, lo ha usado en su casa.
Sí, así. Emily es la que se encarga de hacer copias y se las pone. Y llega Brian, Emily le dice, Brian, ve para allá, ve esa foto. ¿Cómo estás tú?
It's funny because she would just be watching out for her emotions to be able to go move the kid.
So it becomes like a family activity, which, okay.
Yeah, it's more like a fun activity.
Así, cierren los ojos. Vamos a tratar de hacer una mariposa con nuestros ojos, trazando la mariposa con el dedo. Así.
So we have an activity called butterfly breath. And it slows the breath down, calms the body.
Saquen otra vez. Mariposa. Abran los ojos. ¿Cómo se sienten?
In a very simple way for parents to be able to interact with their kids and also teach that skill of being able to come down on the thermometer.
La butterfly es la que uso mucho con el dedo. We do that often. No sé por qué será. ¿Será que los calma los nervios a las 3, 4? A veces mi esposo también. Pero ese día hasta me dijo que yo lo trato porque vengo desesperado del trabajo. Y sí, se calmó, comimos bien, como family, ya. I think the butterfly is really good.
So it gives you a sense of these really simple tools that are very easily disseminable and quite easy to teach. And again, the Fuertes Juntos is designed, it's not designed for families that are, with kids that are, it's not going to be a cure for kids with anxiety and depression, but we certainly use it in our clinic, and it can be a great tool, but really as a preventative measure of trying to increase some of the emotional understanding and recognition of anxiety or stress. These can be quite effective tools that used and also in combination with other techniques. Our school-based program called Recognizing and Managing Anxiety in the Classroom is we follow 4 kids through this interactive online course of and have them go through an incident where their anxiety leads to a problem. And then the teacher needs to decide, or the person taking the course needs to decide the right course of action. And both courses, again, the right action and the wrong action are shown. And it's available free to all educators in LA County. We're currently doing a national rollout of this program. And here are the 4 kids. We have a boy with social anxiety. We have a girl with generalized anxiety, another boy with social separation anxiety, and then one girl that is just has some normal anxiety from going to a new school. And you can get it here. I put the QR code up. You can look at it. Again, it's free to anybody in Los Angeles County, and it doesn't need to be an educator. It can be a parent as well. And there's a lot of material that goes with this. I'll show you in a minute some of the handouts and tools. We're also in the final stages, hopefully, of finalizing our online parenting course, which is similar in format to the educator course. And again, we follow 3 families, one looking more generalized anxiety, one social anxiety, and one school anxiety. And again, the thing about this course is that we're bringing internal aspects of child anxiety to life through anxiety monsters. So there's actually 4 members, 4 characters for each one: the parent, the mother, the father, the child, and the anxiety. And the anxiety is its own character. So this teaches parents to learn that the anxiety doesn't define the child. There are ways of externalizing the anxiety. And when the child is engaged in, because of anxiety, into negative behaviors or upset or refusal, to not blame the child. It really is the anxiety that's driving this behavior. And then again, there's expert commentary and tools and resources. Here's some of the examples that we use: social anxiety tips, scaffolding plans, contracts, and things like that schools can use. We have a number of videos on our YouTube channel. I'd like to acknowledge our funders for this work. And I always end my talks with, this was a card given to us, made for us by a child that we treated for OCD. And the child recapitulated all of the things that he had to do. Some more fun than others. You can see the anxiety graph, you can see dirty hands, you can see touching the trash can, you can see touching the toilet, and you can see getting messy eating a chocolate bar that got all over his hands. And on that note, I will say thank you and open the floor for questions.
All right, well, we'll give it a minute to let questions come in. John, that was a great talk, as always. I think a really thoughtful overview of, just the many different contributors we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about youth anxiety these days. I have a question, just kind of a broad question about what kind of advice do you give to parents when you're kind of working with them directly? And I'm thinking specifically of parents who may have played freely themselves and had lots of unstructured time when they were kids, but who are now parenting during a time that really does feel different, for all the reasons you've said, gun violence and housing crisis and, getting into colleges and whatever their focus is, the world does seem pretty different. Where do you suggest they begin, or kind of what's your approach when working with them?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that is most important is to never blame the parent or the child, is to help understand where the parent's coming from, where the child's coming from, and go from there. So I think psychoeducation is really important. Talking about and describing what we know about anxiety, how anxiety is a normal reaction. It's a normal emotion. Anxiety is what keeps us safe. It's our warning system. When we feel anxious, it means that there's something in our environment that we perceive as dangerous. So, that's an innate reaction. So feeling anxious, feeling worried about something is completely normal. The important piece is how to interpret that feeling. Is the anxiety, is there an actual threat or a likely threat that is driving this response? Or is it more, not necessarily an overreaction, but maybe a misinterpretation of what's going on? And helping them develop skills for trying to evaluate whether this is something real or not. Well, I'm afraid that my child, going on a play date, he's going to be teased and it's going to be miserable. Well, let's talk through the pros and cons of this and why you're feeling that way, And can we start slow? Can we do something easy to start with first? Can maybe you talk to the child's mother? Can maybe the play date be at your house? Can you have an activity that's going to keep both of them busy with things? So it's important to also realize that, in order to grow, you need to be faced with challenges. You can't develop resilience if you've never needed to be resilient. So we want to gradually push our kids to do things that are more and more difficult. And the things that are more difficult for our child are oftentimes more difficult for us as well. But our job as parents is to guide our kids through these difficult situations the best we can. But ultimately, we need, again, to let the child's feet touch the ground if he or she is going to be able to walk.
That makes a lot of sense. Questions are starting to come into the chat. I have two that go together. The first is from Mary O'Connor, asking if the CARES programs are being integrated into private school settings. And then a related question asking for more detail on what the butterfly breathing technique is.
Sure. Yeah, we have worked with some private schools over the years, and we've done some of these programs. the Puertos Juntos were recruiting through schools. But we may at some point do broader recruitment, but right now we're doing it through districts. We've done a lot of talks in schools. We have done some other programming. We did something called Calm Classroom, which was more of kind of a meditative program that we did with some kids for a while. But right now we're really excited about getting our parenting course and our teacher course into schools, because we really want to start making sure the parents and teachers know what they're doing, and having them support the kids in the schools is going to be really critical. Butterfly breath is really it's like figure 8 breathing. So what you do is you go around the butterfly wing this way, breathing in for about 6 seconds, 4 to 6 seconds. And then when you get to the point and you do the counterclockwise or opposite, you breathe out for about 6 seconds. So it's basically breathing in, breathing out. And the butterfly is just kind of a cute mnemonic that kids can use to do it. You can do it with your hand. You can just breathe in and out, but it's a very simple technique.
No, I love it. I think all of the tips and tricks that we can give to kids and parents, whether it's cookie breathing or squeezing lemons or butterfly, sort of building that toolkit of options for self-soothing is really important.
Right.
We have a question from Kelly Kohler. She asks, for the parent course that you described, is additional coaching or support offered to the parents along with the course material? She's curious to just hear more about the structure of it and whether additional parent support, might be helpful for improving outcomes.
Yeah, well, yeah, and we're still building the parent course. It's getting closer. It's not quite done yet. Yeah, but there will be additional materials in the same way you saw some of the forms that I showed with the teacher course. There's gonna be a lot of additional material. There's gonna be some that will be available to parents to take the course. And we do both with the teacher course. With the teacher course, we provide additional coaching and support. With the parenting course, we're not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but there will be a number of additional materials to support the learning.
I have one more question. I was just waiting if others wanted to chime in. I don't want to co-opt anybody's time here. John, I'm interested. I'm thinking a lot about the Surgeon General's warning or kind of focus now on parents and on parent mental health and how overwhelmed parents are on the other side of the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you just sort of have thoughts on that piece as a contributor to child anxiety. I think certainly there are lots of things like social media and kind of the overprotective instincts, but how are you counseling parents around their own mental health these days?
That's a great question. A parent struggling with their own issues is not going to be able to help the child with similar or different issues in a meaningful way. We need to really support parents and work with parents and make sure that they are able to manage the situations that their kids are feeling. In our clinic, we see a lot of anxious kids with anxious parents. And we have to work with the parents, and oftentimes most of the work is done with the parents. In some ways, even with older kids, because it's really critical. And a parent, it's not going to be, we're going to reduce your anxiety. We're going to make your anxiety go away. It's going to be, we're going to teach you or work with you to develop the ability to manage your anxiety just enough so that your child can engage in the exposure or the experience that they need to do to help get themselves better. And so the parenting is really important. But again, it's I try to come into this with an approach that it is understand. I know how you got here. I know how you're feeling. I'm a parent myself. All parents have these feelings. You are not alone. You are not aberrant in any way. This is kind of the situation that we live in. Let's work together to see what we can do for your child and for you and your family. And I think that's an important way, is you got to understand people, you got to accept them where they are, and then work with them to get where they would like to be.
Absolutely. And I think the education you're describing is so vital. I think sometimes being validated in your experience, but also kind of pairing that with information about, the response is really natural. Sometimes it can creep into this direction that, may be counterproductive or not get you the desired effects in terms of how your kid's doing.
Right. Well, parents feel bad, they in these situations, and it's no fun being really anxious or frightened and about these things. So it's important to accept who they are and where they're at, and that the fact that I'm talking to them means that they want to, on some level, they want to get better and they want their child to get better, and that's all you need to get it started.
Absolutely. And I think any avenues for sort of taking down the temperature, because, they are, as you said, surrounded by a lot of intense messages for sure. You're getting a lot of lovely feedback in the chat. I'll let you enjoy that when the meeting wraps, but I don't see any further questions. So I think we can end on time today.
Sounds great. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you again. That was fantastic.
Good. Take care. Bye.